All right, hello. We're going to be beginning the next panel. We're going to begin starting the next panel. All right, everybody from the lobby, start filtering in. All right, everybody. Welcome to our panel on economic mobility, barriers to innovation, and the role of monetary and fiscal policy in supporting shared prosperity. We are joined today by 4 distinguished panelists and a moderator for the debate. First, our moderator is Andrea Federigo, who did his MBA at Booth and graduated in 2023. He is currently working at the Napa Legal Institute, a religious liberty organization based in DC. Next, we have Dr. John C. Phillips, who is a department chair and a professor in the Department of Agribusiness and Food Industry Management / Agricultural Science at Cal Poly Pomona. He provides vital insights into the rapidly changing American agricultural economy. Next, we have Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who is a former U.S. Senator from the North Dakota and co-founder of the One Country Project. As a Democrat with deep expertise in agricultural policy, rural economic development, and bipartisan solutions, she brings a unique perspective on how national policies impact working class Americans. And lastly, we have Victor Gutwein. I'm sorry about that. Next, we have Alex J. Pollock, who is a senior fellow at the Mises Institute and a former principal deputy director of the U.S. Treasury's Office of Financial Research. With decades of experience in banking and financial policy, he's known for his critical insights on housing finance, central banking, and risk, including being president and CEO of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. And lastly, we have Victor Gutwein, who is the founder and managing partner of M25, a leading Midwest-based venture capital firm. Focused on early-stage startups, Victor has played a critical role in boosting entrepreneurship and innovation in regions often overlooked by coastal investors. We're excited for today's debate.
All right, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for what I know will be a timely and essential conversation. The title of this panel, Can We Afford the American Dream?, isn't just rhetorical. It's a pressing question that sits at the center of today's economic discourse. For generations, the American dream has symbolized upward mobility, the belief that with hard work, anyone can build a better life. But today, that promise feels increasingly out of reach for many Americans. Real wages have stagnated for much of the middle class. Home ownership, once a cornerstone of the dream, now feels elusive for younger generations. And access to quality education, affordable healthcare, and secure retirement is uneven at best. Economic mobility, the engine behind the dream, is slowing. Children born in the lowest income brackets are statistically less likely to climb the economic ladder than they were just a few decades ago. At the same time, we face structural barriers to innovation and growth. Regulatory complexity and rising capital costs have made it harder for small businesses and new industries to thrive. If innovation is the fuel of long-term prosperity, are we unintentionally starving the engine? And then there's the role of policy. Are our monetary and fiscal tools advancing broad-based prosperity, or are they reinforcing inequalities? From interest rate hikes to federal spending packages, the consequences of these decisions are felt unequally across the population. Today's panel will explore these tensions. We will look at where the economy stands, what's working, what's not working, and how we can chart a path forward that renews the promise of prosperity for all Americans. So I think we can start with opening remarks. Do we want to go in order? If you want to get us started, John?
Well, it's certainly a privilege and pleasure to be on this panel with so many distinguished guests, and I appreciate the invitation. The title of this panel is, Can We Afford the American Dream? When you think about the American dream, what pops into your mind first? For me, is home ownership, owning your own home. I'm not referring to condominiums, nor to a trailer, a double wide, in a mobile home park where you must pay the lot rent. I'm talking about your own house, 4 permanent walls. So this does not include tents. Hopefully with windows, sitting on land that you own. That's what home ownership means to me. For this reason, the first topic I will address is the affordability of home ownership. Beyond that, there are alternative interpretations of the American dream. For example, if you work hard and apply yourself, you will be able to retire and not be destitute poor. I mean, you have a place to live and can afford electricity, heat, air conditioning, and medical care. You're also able to eat human food and not something intended for pets. No offense to the companion animal in row 6. That's a low bar. I bet most of us are aiming for a comfortable retirement, the definition of which will vary from person to person. You may think that comfortable means golfing 3 times a week and extensive international travel. In contrast, I'm happy to buy my clothes at the thrift store. Regardless, the status of senior citizens and the outlook for retirement in America will be my second topic. There's a third, broader way to look at the American dream. We are familiar with our own experiences and lifestyles throughout our lives. For those of us who have children, there is the hope and perhaps expectation that their lives will be better than our lives. This is assuming that our kids don't self-destruct through alcohol, drugs, gang, or cult membership, crime, gambling addiction, or other patterns of bad choices. You may think I'm joking, but issues like this happen more frequently than you may think, occasionally even in the best families. I can't tell you how many biographies of highly successful people, like CEOs of major corporations, who had a child who passed away in their early adulthood due to preventable factors. Be that as it may, a comparison of intergenerational well-being will be my third topic. Okay, so back to the first topic, home ownership. I'll give you an example of how affordable a house is today for a 2025 college grad. Bankrate.com lists the average starting salaries for 5 types of degrees, and social sciences is in the middle of them. That is, it is third of the 5 academic majors that they sampled. So let's examine a 2025 college graduate in the social sciences. Bankrate.com lists the average starting salary for these graduates as $67,316, which breaks down to $5,610 a month. After federal income tax and FICA, it's $4,516 per month. Most states and some municipalities have their own income tax. For the sake of simplicity, let's just say the net pay after taxes will be $4,516 per month, but probably somewhat less. According to the Motley Fool, the median home sales price in the United States was $416,900 in the first quarter of 2025. The standard down payment of a house is 20% of the sales price. Buyers typically pay less than 20%, and the National Association of Realtors recently recorded a median home down payment of $71,442. If you are netting $4,500 per month, how long will it take you to save $71,000? Keep in mind that the average rent of a studio apartment is $1,677 in the United States, according to apartments.com. Let's not forget our example is a college graduate, so we can be reasonably confident that they will have a student loan payment as well. EducationData.com reports an average student loan payment of $503 per month. I'm going up against my time limit, so I'll summarize in saying that it will take a person 238 months, or about 20 years, to save up that $71,000 if they save $300 a month. Home ownership is just not happening for this individual.
Thank you. I just want to kind of calibrate our thinking as we think about the American experience, because we're talking a lot about, is the American dream, however you want to define that, is that still available to every American, and what will we see in terms of America's economic outlook in the next 20, 30 years. So let's just start out by thinking about the American experiment. What drove the development of opportunity? It was westward expansion, right? Manifest destiny, you can call it that. But the opportunity always was that you could migrate and have new opportunities or experience new opportunities if you had the gumption, if you had the courage, if you were willing to take the risk. And so we saw a whole population, from Jefferson buying the Louisiana Purchase to, might say Manifest Destiny, leading to taking over New Mexico and Texas and California. But that opportunity was always go west, young man, and grow up with a country, right? And so as we looked at what those safeties, cultural and social safety nets were, but they were also economic safety nets. We didn't just consolidate people in one spot. We offered opportunity for expansion and for movement. And people were willing to move. People were willing to take that risk, especially if they were agrarian. I come from North Dakota, bonanza farms, but later got divided into much smaller units. And this was a real opportunity. And then you think about the next great migration, which was during the World Wars, where you saw rural people, whether it was in North Dakota during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, moving to factory-like jobs, moving to the defense industry, creating more opportunity. The government wisely figured out that when these folks come home from the war, they're going to need an opportunity. So we're going to create something called the GI Bill, which was fabulously successful. And so that's the next step that I see in the American kind of experience, which is now education became the great economic safety valve. We're going to use American education to grow the middle class, to grow that opportunity. That coupled with union rights, which grew wages for those people who were not going to get four-year degrees, not going to pursue professional careers. But we saw this incredibly expansive growth in the American middle class, the opportunity. The sense, I think, it began that our notion of what today is the American dream. That if you work hard, if you study hard, if you apply your morals and your ethics, you will be successful in America. You'll own a house. Your kids will live a better life than you've lived. You'll be able to worship where you want to worship. That nothing stops this kind of exceptional vision that we have of America. That comes on the heels of also the civil rights movement and the migration, especially during the war years, of poor African Americans north into cities like Chicago, north into the Route 66 migration. But yet there was always that sense that we have opportunity. Now what you will see, and I will tell you from my experience as a United States Senator studying why it is that we see declining rates of opportunity and declining rates of wealth in rural America. It used to be that people moved out of rural America. They are not moving the way they used to. In part, that's cultural. But the other part of that is really economic. And you might say, but you're going to earn a wage in Carrington, North Dakota of $10 an hour, and if you did that same job in Chicago, it'd be $25. And I would tell you, is grandma going to be there to pick up the kids at school? Are you going to be able to afford housing because you're living in the family home? Or you're the safety net of staying where you are. And so migration is not as prevalent as it used to be. So that idea that you move to improve your circumstance or you move to improve your opportunity. So what is the next great leap? What is the next great leap that's going to lead to an explosion of opportunity for the middle class? And I'm probably in a minority for many people, but I think it's technology. And so the professor here just has talked about housing. How many of you have seen a story about printing 3D houses? Right? Pretty amazing. We've got to figure out because those of us who have done this work trying to find affordable housing knows that the vast majority of the embedded costs of going greenfield are just way too high because of regulation, way too high because of mandates in terms of how we need to do it, or green spaces or parking, whatever that looks like. And so we need to be mindful of it's not just the construction cost of a house, it also is the embedded fiscal cost of financing that house. But if you look at technology can be the great equalizer. And so what you can do in Carrington, North Dakota can also be done in Chicago. And that wage gap could be bridged by technology opportunities. And so to me, that we think, I think, too narrowly, because we go back to that traditional sense of what does the American dream look like. The American dream looks like whatever the expectation of the population is at the time. And so to me, the expectation is always going to be led by how can I make a living that gives me the opportunity to feed my family, protect my family, raise my family in a good community, educate my family, and provide for a solid retirement. Retirement is probably the area that I'm most concerned about, that and healthcare. We can talk about the rising cost of healthcare and what that means for the American dream. But if you look at the challenges that we are going to have in kind of systemic areas, especially in retirement, this is a ticking time bomb. And so that is why you think about, I used to say that retirement is like a three-legged stool. You have a defined benefit pension plan. That means kind of an annuity for those. Your generation will never see a defined benefit plan, trust me. So a defined benefit pension plan, which means you're entitled to a certain amount every month. You have your Social Security, which was never intended to be your retirement plan. And you have the equity in your house, so your house is paid for. That's the three-legged stool. We're now kicking out from underneath that three-legged stool two of the legs, which is housing. People aren't owning their house, and if they are, they're continuing to take out mortgages, secondary mortgages. They don't own their house outright the way my parents' generation, by the time they were retiring, owned a house. And so now we have only Social Security, and a Social Security system that literally will have to cut back in 2032, depending upon what they do with taxes on Social Security income by that point in time. And so I think that if we're going to focus, one of the things that we can do for the next generation is guarantee that their parents have financial stability. But we also have to address the rising cost and unreasonable cost of healthcare. And if we can take care of those two things, if we can figure those two things out, I think there will be an abundance, if we can put it that way. There will be, the call of this panel is, can we afford the American dream? Of course we can. Of course, because when we grow productivity, when people go to work in productive ways, that grows the economy and that grows the opportunity. And so we have to look at kind of the macroeconomic, but as I always remind people, it's not enough to just look at the macroeconomic conditions. We have to look at the macaroni and cheese economic circumstances. My friend Barbara Mikulski used to remind everybody in the Democratic caucus that yes, we need to understand the macro issues, but when we really understand the macaroni and cheese issues, we can be successful and really help people. And so to me, it is a growth from the bottom up by providing that economic opportunity and understanding the impediments of growth of economic opportunity that we need to really be focused on right now. And I think that as you look at the trajectory of American history, the next great leap will be made in technology.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we afford the American dream? As was just said, the answer is yes, because the American dream makes itself affordable if we live it. And the American dream, as I interpret it and embedded in the American culture and identity, is composed of freedom, inventiveness. Inventiveness was essential to the Americans' notion of themselves. The advance in the spread of knowledge, and notable the creation of public schools, and the fact that the children went to school in this country, a society open to enterprise and risk-taking. I mentioned the pioneers going west. Nothing we do has as much risk as getting on the covered wagon with your wife and kids and heading west. Think of that. And finally, a society of property owners. I say that's a Jeffersonian idea and a good one. In the current society, it becomes a society of homeowners, but it's back to owning your own homestead. When your covered wagon got there, now can you own your own house and If we follow the dream, the answer is yes, because that dream, as I've just discussed it, is what makes for economic growth and a rising standard of living for ordinary people like you and like me. Everybody can't be above average, but the average can go up and up without any discernible limit. However many problems we think there are, and however pessimistic you might be in various ways, it's nothing like 1930. I mentioned 1930 because John Maynard Keynes, we talked a little bit about Keynes at our lunch table. In 1930, in the darkness of the depression, the worldwide depression of the time, wrote a little essay called Economic Prospects for Our Grandchildren. And he asked himself the question, what will the economics be like 100 years from now? In other words, in 2030. In other words, now. And he said this remarkable thing. I would predict that the standard of life in progressive countries 100 years hence will be between 4 and 8 times as high as it is today. Could people in general and on average really be 4 to 8 times better off in 100 years? And the answer is this was a great forecast, and it's come true. And in fact, as we get to 2030, people are going to be more than 7 times better off than they were in 1930. But what kind of a growth rate does it take to be 4 times better off in 100 years? Answer is 1.4% per capita real. So 1.4% real per capita gets you 4 times in 100 years. 2% gets you more than 7 times, and 2.1% gets you 8 times better off. These are astonishing, but we are in fact 7 or 8 times better off than people were 100 years ago. At the end of the 19th century, average industrial wages per week have been estimated at $8.80. That was for a work week of 60 hours. That would be 6 days, working 10 hours a day. That's for the men. The women at home work 7 days, 10 hours a day. That's 70 hours a week. But the industrial wage translates to 15 cents an hour. Inflation adjusted today, industrial wages are 8 times higher than they were then. And on top of that, the amount that you have to work has fallen dramatically, and leisure time has something like tripled. So the American dream not only results in lots more goods and services and education and culture and intellectual development, but a lot less toil and a lot less backbreaking labor, so that we work, but we get to work more and toil less, and this is all due to the inventiveness and risk-taking, which results in growth as knowledge is applied, to the capitalization of the farm, first of all, the household, second of all, radically reducing the toil that went into maintaining a household, industry, paperwork, and now perhaps to intellectual work also. So how much can the standard of living improve? Well, 100 years ago, how many Americans had flush toilets? In 1900, 125 years ago. 15%. How many had running water? 24%. How many had central heating? 1%. Electricity? 3%. How many owned an automobile? Well, 1%. The people of that time could not imagine how much better off we are now, and we cannot imagine how difficult their lives were compared to ours. And if we look forward, I see no reason to think that the people in the future are not going to be far better off because of the American dream than we are now. And I just want to mention 2 other things. We can't get away without money. Essential to making this all happen is a stable currency. As the great Fed Chairman Paul Volcker said, essential to prosperity is trust in the stability of the currency. And he was right. And even greater, Fed Chairman William McChesney Martin said inflation is a thief in the night. And I think that's a better description of inflation than Chairman Bernanke's 2% inflation forever theory. So we have to have a stable currency and therefore a government that doesn't debase the currency continually. We mentioned before property ownership, and this brings me to my last point. Jeffersonian, yeoman farmer, today home ownership. We have had 2 house price bubbles in this century. This advanced 21st century has already had 2 house price bubbles, both financed by the money printing of the Federal Reserve, our central bank. We do have 65% of the households of the country which own their own home, which isn't too bad. But we have excessive money printing and excessive government intervention, which tries to make housing affordable and succeeds in making it unaffordable by running the prices up and creating house price bubbles. We have to get out of that. Of all of the outstanding mortgages in the country, which is about $14 trillion, $10 trillion are guaranteed by the government. Yep. That's ridiculous. You can't have a market that takes 70% of its outstanding debt to be guaranteed. So we need to cut that back. We need maybe from 70% to say 20%. We need to avoid Federal Reserve-induced house price bubbles, and same in other countries with other central banks. And finally, we need to add back the concept of savings to our idea of housing. We used the principal housing finance lenders in this country used to be called savings and loans. We forgot about the savings part. We only focused on the loans. And so I will end with the thought that a great American icon and father of the American dream was Benjamin Franklin, with his emphasis on liberty, on inventiveness, on knowledge and the spread of knowledge, and on public education, and on saving and thrift. And with all that, then I have no doubt that we can certainly afford the American dream going forward for a very long time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today at the American Identity Summit. My name is Victor Gutwein, and I'm the founder and managing partner of M25, a venture capital firm that invests in early-stage software startups in the Midwest. Originally from Indiana and an economics graduate of the University of Chicago, I now live a few miles away in South Shore with my wife and 4 kids and attend Christchurch, Chicago, just a few blocks from here. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working with countless entrepreneurs who embody the American dream. Individuals from all walks of life who've built companies that create jobs and drive innovation. We've backed everyone from successful serial founders to first-generation immigrants, descendants of slaves, individuals carrying a felony, college dropouts, and those from generational wealth. From Bismarck to Cincinnati to Naperville, these founders are driven by all sorts of motivations, providing for their families, pure ambition, a refusal to work for the man in a corporate environment, or simply a need to solve a problem they couldn't ignore. But as we celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit that defines the American dream, it's also important to recognize some of the challenges that have grown over time. For one, the U.S. federal and state governments often tout their desire to help entrepreneurship, but too many of the tools they offer, like SSBCI funding or crowdfunding regulations, are either ineffective, net negative, or ripe for abuse. Meanwhile, recent policies, from tariffs to rapid government spending cuts, have disproportionately harmed small businesses, while large corporations have been able to negotiate side deals and leverage their balance sheets to weather the storm. This is making it harder for the very entrepreneurs we all say we want to support. At the same time, if we're serious about ensuring that anyone can pursue the American dream, we need to recognize that we're not exactly welcoming the global exchange of ideas, trade, and talent. As we tighten immigration, we're cutting ourselves off from some of the brightest minds and most ambitious individuals who can help fuel our economy and drive innovation and become a this generation American. It's a paradox. We say we want to provide opportunities for all, but we continue to limit access to the very pathways that make that possible. Finally, let's consider the shifting landscape of the American dream itself. In the post-war era, the U.S. thrived by outsourcing jobs that were less desirable, or using migrant labor for domestic, low-paying jobs, while focusing on building a high-skill, high-wage economy with cheap goods that boosted the middle class. Now there's a strong push to bring back these jobs, increase expensive domestic production, and keep migrants out. But if we increase costs for the average American, we'll find Americans unwilling or unable to take a leap of faith and start the next great American business. Combine that with a dramatic drop in new Americans immigrating and starting companies, and it's not just a matter of economic policy, it's a matter of preserving the spirit of entrepreneurship that has made this country exceptional. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Let's start our discussion from monetary policy. And Alex, you criticized the Fed before, and I think in the latest year from the libertarian side, we've heard more and more calls for abolishing the Fed altogether. Do you have any specific views in terms of how the Fed could be conducting monetary policy better, or do you think we should consider at all abolishing the Fed?
I'm a supporter of reform of the central bank, the Federal Reserve, not abolishment. And even if you did think it should be abolished, it's a hopeless thought because it won't be. The reason being that the single most useful thing to governments is to have a central bank. And so all governments now have them. This has been an astonishing change in the world. Every government has a central bank. Why? Because they're the most useful thing for financing the government that you can possibly have. So we're going to have it. What should it be? It should be, as Paul Volcker said, as Alan Greenspan, another great Federal Reserve chairman, suggested that the right inflation target is 0. He said 0 properly measured. We'll grant him that. He ought to measure it properly. 0 inflation, that is to say stable money, that is to say a sound currency. We need to get away, in my opinion, from the commitment of the central bank to perpetual inflation. This actually is an astonishing thing that the Federal Reserve, on its own, without approval of anybody else, announced we're going to have perpetual inflation. That was extremely radical and a radical mistake, in my view. The way to do that is to, I think, return to the constitutional order, which is that it's actually the Congress that has the responsibility for defining money. That's Article 1, Section 8. The Congress has a responsibility to create money and regulate the value thereof, and it has to set the bounds for the central bank. So the central bank is committed to that. There are many other things we could talk about, but that's the most important one.
If I could just comment, probably the most stable part of our fiscal, economic system in the United States is the Fed. I mean, you may not like it, you may not like 2%, you may not like quantitative easing, you may not like any of the things that they do, but they are looking at a set of metrics every day, trying to make up their mind on what they're going to do. We'll see if they're going to reduce interest rates. But this is a failure They have become so significant and have an outsized role because we have failed to set fiscal policy under Article 1. What does that look like? We haven't done a very good job effectively investing in our country in meaningful ways that can drive economic growth. We haven't been very effective in debt and deficit reduction. We have exploded it. And this probably not be popular for many people in this room, but when someone announces as president that we have promoted the best economy in the history of the world, and oh, by the way, we're going to stimulate the economy with additional spending, which there was under the Trump years, and with lower tax rates. And so you saw stimulus at the same time when you traditionally would have waited to provide or to invoke those kinds of efforts in a period of downturn in the economy. And so never mind that, the tax policy is completely messed up in this country. My prediction for what's going to happen in the next 5 months is they aren't going to do anything. They're once again going to kick the can down the road because there is no willingness of people to compromise. There's no willingness of people to lead in unfavorable decisions. And that would require a reduction of expenses and actually looking at a revenue path forward that would produce enough revenue to reduce debt and deficit. And so we can complain about the Fed all we want, but the reality is the Fed has been the most stable influence and predictable influence, in my opinion, in driving this economy from a kind of government standpoint.
We disagree on that one, but we do agree we need a Congress that really lives by Article 1
Yeah.
and does it.
Yeah, if you go back and take a look at what happened COVID, that the fiscal policy was pretty flat-footed. Powell jumped into COVID a lot faster. And I think, he can complain about inflation, but maybe some of that activity actually drove inflation on the front end. So, we can talk about what happened that led to the kinds of inflationary cycles that we're in right now, but the Fed has outsized power. They're appointed by and approved by the government. There is a reason why the market tanked when the president said that maybe it was time for Jerome Powell to go, because he was asserting responsibility over monetary policy, which was not favorably received by the markets.
John, one of the hottest topics of conversations these days are the tariffs that the Trump administration is pushing. What's your view on those? Are they here to stay? Are they just leverage to negotiate better trade deals? Where do you see this ending up?
Well, our agricultural sector is one of our most productive sectors, and they rely extensively on exports. We cannot consume all of the agricultural commodities that we produce. So without exports, the agricultural economy, including the small towns with the implement dealerships and tractor dealerships, they're going to be in very difficult economic situations. So as far as agriculture goes, international trade, exports in particular, are a very good and essential thing. The freer the trade and the more stable the regime of tariffs or not having tariffs, the better off the agricultural sector is going to be. Back in 2008 to 2010, we had the financial crisis, and President Obama bailed out the auto industry. Everyone was up in arms. How can the government be favoring one specific private industry, three major companies that dominate that, or domestic companies that dominate that industry, because people were unable to get credit to purchase the automobiles. Then in the first Trump administration, there was a trade war with China. China retaliated and refused to buy our soybeans. China replaced that source of soybeans with Brazil. So subsequently, there was a bailout of the farmers. Not too common knowledge, the bailout of the farmers under the Trump first administration exceeded in size of President Obama's bailout of the auto industry. As an economist, I'm a firm believer in comparative advantage. Every place should do what they're best at doing. We will not have a coffee industry in the United States. Yeah, they dabble in coffee in California, and there's a little bit of coffee in Hawaii, but we rely on international trade. Bananas, we could probably produce bananas indoors, but it might be $20 a banana. So it's economically infeasible. We need trade. We need trade, or we're going to be eating the same thing, and it's things where a lot of gruel and mush, and root crops, turnips and potatoes from the root cellar that you've been storing. So we need that variety. We need to be able to import the fresh fruit, the grapes from Chile, in the winter. We're excellent at producing table grapes in California, but we can only do that for a limited part of the year. Likewise with strawberries. The sooner the tariffs are, if not eliminated, but diminished and stabilized, the better off the agricultural economy is going to go.
Fair enough.
I think we're all cheering for your comparative advantage.
Victor, let's look at the private sector now and innovation. What do you see as the single biggest obstacle to growth for startups and small businesses today? And can the government do anything about it, or should they just try to get out their way?
Yeah. It might not be well known in this audience, but venture capital and startups are at a low point. In the last 10 years, this past quarter was the lowest number of seed startups receiving investment. So that there's a lot of headlines about some of the big mega rounds that are happening for AI investment, but there's fewer companies being funded right now than there have been in over 10 years. I think we're in a bit of a recession there. Some of the biggest issues has been the lack of stability. We need there to be an active market for buying successful startups, or for them to eventually go public through an IPO process. That is not happening right now because the markets are very volatile, and you have a lot of uncertainty with where future profitability will come, depending on if it relies on international trade, or if it relies on you're a company that sells something to other businesses that may be going through a lot of turmoil right now because they're having these tariff issues. So when you are a company thinking about going public, you need to see that the public markets are mature and stable and not going up and down every week. And that has been a pretty big limiting factor right now for companies to sell. Companies need to sell in order to return capital back to their investors, which then can invest in new companies. And that cycle has basically been completely halted for a couple of years now. You can blame interest rates being high for part of that, for the first initial slowdown. You can blame also just irrational exuberance for it being too much of a bubble in 2021 and it popping, and there's just some hesitancy. But right now, the biggest issue is stability. There's a lot of companies that are ready to sell or to have a large M&A or a large IPO process, but there's no ability for them to do that in an unstable environment. Nobody's going to put the money out when they need to conserve cash. So there's not going to be a corporate buyer, or the public markets aren't going to digest that when they're sensing fear. So we need to have those exits happen. We need to recycle that capital back and start funding new investments, because many of you mentioned how innovation, inventiveness, new technology is going to be one of the things that can keep the American dream alive. It's because we can't just keep moving west. We can't just, our agricultural productivity percentage increases are reaching a diminishing point of return. Where else can we see growth? It's got to be new businesses, new technologies, new ideas. And right now we're seeing that shrink for the first time in a long time. And so that's concerning to me. I mean, that's the sector I'm in, and I'm very alive and aware of that. And so we need that stability first and foremost in order to have those exits happen, have that cash come back to be for investors to be excited to invest in new companies again.
I don't think there's any doubt but that inventiveness or innovation, the application of first of all, the creation and then the application of new knowledge is the driving force of economic growth, which has the great advantage that it makes average ordinary people better off so far without limit, and I think without limit in the foreseeable future, as I said. But on interest rates aren't high now. A good Austrian economist would say, and I would agree, that the problems you're seeing are because interest rates were previously suppressed too low.
Free money.
And caused the expansion and the leveraging which we now pay for, and that's.
And I think it was the drastic shift that was hard to digest
and the shift is hard.
Yeah.
And it also was risk factors. So if I could have a guaranteed 4 to 5, 7%, some interest rates at 7%, I'm going to put my money there. I'm not going to go to someone and say, please invest this money for me for a rate of return, because I could do it risk-free at a much higher rate than what was happening before. But one of the things that we're ignoring in this, because we're all kind of talking about macroeconomics, the Fed, what's the Fed going to do? What's the climate currently for mergers and acquisitions? What's the climate for taking something public? At the bottom line, here's a calibrating feature. We have the highest consumer debt in the history of this country right now, funded many ways by credit card debt that's at 29%. People will never get out of debt. They're living hand to mouth. 60% of the people in this country could not afford a $500 hit.
Benjamin Franklin would not approve.
No, he would not. But our whole economy, no, I shouldn't say the whole economy, but our economy is functionally a consumption economy. And so as a result, there is very little discouragement from consumption. Right? There's very little encouragement, and one good thing about rising interest rates is that it has encouraged at least some level of savings. We saw it during COVID, but what happened is when the pent-up demand, when things opened up again, we had huge inflationary pressure because there was huge pent-up demand from people who had, because of government largesse, putting money in their bank account. Let's admit that. Mm-hmm. But if you look kind of overall, and if you look at the condition of the average American today, the one thing that the Democratic Party did not understand in this last election, because they believed their own numbers, they believed the macro numbers, and didn't worry about the macaroni and cheese numbers, that people were actually hurting, that people felt insecure, that people coming out of COVID already were traumatized by the impact that had on the family, and now they have this economic instability. And so I think that we can talk about what drives the overall economy, but there needs to be rewards for the average person in this country as the economy grows. And we have seen that disparate, people who have wealth getting wealthier. I mean, people talk about the income gap. I worry more about the worth gap, the capital differentiation between people at the bottom and people at the top, because money will make money and people will get richer and richer. That's not necessarily saying I'm at the expense of poor people, but people will feel like they're getting further and further left behind.
Could I make one comment
Sure.
on one of the comments on venture capital, which is experience of uncertainty now. The uncertainty is always there. Sometimes we feel it more than others, and we know it's there, but it's always there. But there's a paradox which has also always fascinated me quite a bit. The economic growth depends upon inventiveness, innovation, risk-taking, and that drives growth. But that very entrepreneurial activity creates uncertainty. So does political innovation, so do central banks. Chairman Powell said, we're navigating by the stars on a cloudy night. He's exactly right. We believe those stars are there, but we can't see them. So there's uncertainty. And the paradox I find really fascinating is that the very creativity and risk-taking that causes growth and causes us all to have higher and higher standards of living, as I say. Everybody can't be above average, but the average can rise without limit, I think, at least in any near term. That very activity causes the uncertainty, which causes problems. Hence, I conclude that the creativity will drive a favorable trend, but we'll never get away from having cycles. We'll be cycling up and down on a rising trend.
Not to sound like the capitalist or the communist on this panel, but we've been talking a lot about capital investment and risk-taking, and that is the great American super sauce, in my opinion, the ability to apply capital. We haven't talked a lot about growth of productivity of the American worker. And when our productivity is flat, which it has been for a long time, you aren't going to see economic growth. And so it's not just capital investment, it's what does that mean for American labor, and how does labor contribute to the overall growth of the economy? And our productivity has been flat. And uncertainty in productivity right now, which you mentioned, which is deportations of people who are working, that hits both on the innovation side, when we basically disinvite the smartest people in the world to come and get educated at institutions like this one, but we also have to appreciate and understand how do we grow productivity and give workers a greater share of the net economic growth that comes as a result of raising productivity.
Perfect. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll open it up to the public. So if you guys want to start thinking about your questions. Healthcare is obviously very difficult situation in the country. It's increasingly unaffordable. Medicare and Medicaid clearly not been working out as efficiently as we thought. What can we do to really get back in a more sustainable healthcare industry? What can we do in terms of policy? What can we do in terms of innovation?
Well, I'll take a stab at it.
Sure.
70% of all healthcare costs are driven by chronic conditions, most of which is treatable or preventable. So you just want to start there. If you take a look at the explosion of type 2 diabetes. Now we've got these new miracle drugs. Let's try and be a little cautious in terms of side effects. But, if you want to reduce healthcare costs, maybe we should be trying to find an affordable way to get people healthier. And so I don't disagree with the HHS secretary. He's saying a lot of things Michelle Obama said that everybody hated, right? Start moving, eat good, better food, do the kinds of things that encourage better wellness outcomes for you. But the other thing that I think we need to support, and it's in the vein of technology, we need to support disruptors. What does that look like? So if you go to a hospital to get an X-ray, you're going to pay for the embedded costs of that entire infrastructure. If you go to an imaging center that's not going to take insurance, it still might be cheaper given your deductible. And so there's a whole lot of flex in the healthcare system that desperately needs to be ferreted out. And we need to decide, like we did, I'll give you a great example. Almost all dialysis in this country is paid for by the federal government. Did you know that? That's because private insurance wouldn't cover it. And so there's high cost, potentially high reward kinds of things that maybe we should be talking about. The growth in prescription drugs, the growth in utilization of healthcare system. There's a great book, it's aging out now, but it's called Being Mortal. It was written by an advisor to President Obama, but basically makes the case for better end-of-life decision-making. Can take tremendous cost out of the healthcare system. You know why these things don't happen? Because people don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told that, guess what? We're not going to give you a hip replacement until you lose 50 pounds. Guess what? We're not going to give you a new lung if you've been smoking your whole life. And so, we don't have, we have a free-for-all in our healthcare system. Everybody gets whatever they want. And there's no consequences or there's no sticks in the system. And that sounds cruel, but it's the reality of why the healthcare costs are so high. And I'm not saying we should ration. In fact, I was with somebody who ran a health, was an executive in a healthcare company, I won't tell you which one, who basically said, I said, what are we going to do? He said, we've got to ration healthcare. Who's standing up for death panels? No one's standing up for death panels. And so that whole sense of we want to drive the top in the industry, but we absolutely have to look at the user base and how we hold people accountable for how they're using healthcare and how they're protecting their own life trajectory.
Well, I'm not standing up for death panels either, but I am standing up
for
people doing what they want in general. They may have to take the responsibility for the cost of what they do.
But is there that in this system?
In general, and I don't know much about healthcare. I know something about the financial system. But if we look at the three areas where the government for at least 40 or 50 years has done the most to try to make things affordable, that is to say healthcare, higher education, and housing. Those are all the places that things are the least affordable. So that leads me to believe that there has to be a bigger bottoms-up element in all of those things that we do than what we've got, because the big interventions have clearly been a failure in all three of those areas.
Thank you. All right, should we start from here?
Thank you very much for that most
I've got to
enlightening
go. That was fun. Great
conversation.
I've got to go.
So I am Nigerian, born and bred. I still live in Nigeria most of the time. And when I know.
I'm sorry. Don't mean to interrupt you, but I have to go at 3.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, great to see you, John. Thanks.
So I know many people in Nigeria. Okay, I'll put it this way. More than 70% of Nigeria's 210 million population, the polls say, want to leave their country. Now, when I first saw the topic for this summit, it said, can we afford the American dream? My Nigerian mind thought that you were going to discuss, can America afford the dreams of all the people coming? Because to a lot of people in the rest of the world, America is not just a geographical location, it is a dream. So America is the dream of the more than 70%, or at least, a huge multitude in places like Nigeria and other parts of the world. I mean, the American embassy, the queues outside, some people apply more than 5 times even after being turned down. So my question now is, even though it wasn't the topic that I thought it was, do you think America can still afford the dreams of the millions of people from places like where I come from that see this place as a dream and that look forward to actualizing their dreams in this place? Do you think America can still afford to give those people their dreams? Thank you.
Victor, do you want to take this?
I actually kind of, if we didn't have those dreamers coming here and doing what they've done, which has been largely incredibly beneficial to our economy, then we would not be able to afford any. Like there are so many companies that have been launched by immigrants, or that are the first employees that came from India, from Nigeria, from Mexico, wherever, and they're contributing to our economy much more than often 3rd, 4th, 10th generation Americans are, out of the gate. And I think, maybe it's because we have such a tough filter to get here, that it's the best of the best coming from Nigeria and from all those countries. But I think if we didn't have the ones that we've had, and it makes me think that there's room to have more, given how beneficial the immigrants have been. I think it's the question is actually the opposite: is can we afford not to have that? And that's what I'm most concerned about right now, is that we're talking in a lot of ways and acting in the past couple months in very drastic ways to limit students, employees, et cetera, just general immigration from these countries. And so for me, that's actually the biggest concern. I think if you look at the startups that have been founded by immigrants, and those, many of those have come on to be the largest publicly traded companies on NASDAQ. And if you look at, there was this stat of the CEOs of was it Microsoft, Google? I know there was all of them are from India or something. Okay, so some of our brightest people and some of our most biggest companies and a lot of our startups are all people that we wouldn't have had if we had cut off the embassy completely and not let those people come over here. So I think it's not that can we afford to let these people come. I think it's can we afford not to. I think we can't, and I think it's probably worth actually testing out allowing more versus the opposite.
Heidi, John, do you want to weigh in on this, or should we?
Well, I'm trying to tie there. I think it's not just immigration, but it's investment in global. Is that part of your question? Right, that's what I thought. So there is a reason why DOGE went after USAID first, because there isn't a lot of political support, but there's a lot of intellectual support for the kind of growth assistance that can be provided by institutions like the Export-Import Bank, like the World Bank, the kinds of institutions that we support and have supported historically. And the question is, what is in America's best economic interest, but also national security interest? And the movement away from soft power and the movement away from, kind of investment, what I would say investment or collaboration and cooperation with people across the world is very, very dangerous. And the people who would be most articulate in explaining that, quite honestly, are people who serve in the military and foreign policy experts. And so we're headed in the wrong direction. We need to build a constituency around that level of integration of our fiscal policy that says, yes, this is worthwhile. And in the meantime, we are, and just to admit, I'm a globalist. I mean, I don't understand how a country of 350 million people can be successful. I'm with you on tariffs. I mean, how you can be successful by erecting trade barriers and economic barriers, that's not going to work long term for your generation. And so I think we have to be really vigilant about explaining and understanding that your world is going to be much more complex, but also much more vibrant and available if we're smart about how we make investments. So we can't afford to not do it. The question is, can we move the body politic to understanding that this is a critical component of America's economic future?
Thank you. Should we take one over there?
Hello. So my name is Luca from Northwestern University, and my question is mainly directed at Mr. Gutwein. And I'd say, so you spoke about how high-skilled immigration benefits America, the enterprise, but what's your case for this immigration genuinely benefiting the American people? Like, I'd say we're actually not a sports team like Elon Musk and Vivek said, like drafting players to win a championship. We're a nation, and we have a distinct culture and identity, and it's pretty gravely jeopardized by mass immigration. And on the innovation topic, I'd also like to add that the bulk of American innovation is not really done by these high-skilled immigrants. Americans start businesses and innovate, and then high-skilled immigrants come in later and typically climb the corporate ladder. Many tech CEOs, possibly even the majority, as you were saying, are Indian, but if you look at the founders, they're all American.
Where's Elon Musk from again? And he's started a lot of companies, and I don't think he's from America. But when you look at like Y Combinator batches, I think there's a huge amount that are immigrants, first generation or second generation. I also think that when you talk about what an American is, these people come for school, for a job. It could be 5 years later, they go back to Michoacan, they go back to Bangalore. That's not home almost 5 years later, 10 years later. They've already become more American than they are from where, it's the speed at which America changes these people is incredible. I've seen it. We work with a lot of our founders are first generation immigrants. You know, they came over maybe as kids, maybe more recently as adults, and they're taking the risk that then, you know, my ancestors did 100 years ago, and they started a business here in the United States. So they're taking that same risk. They're often more likely to be entrepreneurial than the students that have been here that are the liberal arts majors that are expecting a job right out of undergrad, and you know, have never had a high school job, never had to work hard, never had to pay for you know, to buy a car. They just got that from their mom and dad. Those people aren't always as entrepreneurial. They can be. We've backed a lot of those types of people. I said I kind of listed off the types of people we've backed historically. But I think to say that immigrants aren't out punching their weight class when it comes to value created in the U.S., I think that's pretty clearly wrong. Because those are the ones taking the most risk. They're investing sweat equity much harder than because they have to than their peers that are, you know, born and bred from multiple generations, you know, grown in America. And so I think that's something that I've witnessed firsthand pretty dramatically. And I think you know, most of the, I mean, like your example of the, you know, Elon Musk is he came over here from South Africa and started, I don't know, 20 companies now or something. But you know, and so you know, the value of that versus you know, some of the unskilled labor that you know you might be insinuating is taking or net negative. I think on a balance, all immigrants on balance, if you weight it, it's definitely outpunching their weight class.
Do we have time for one last question? Okay. Should we take one over there?
Hello, Mark Weiermiller. I'm a small business person in Chicago. And as far as the American dream, I'm more concerned about the libertarian aspect of this as far as shrinking the size, scope, and cost of government with less taxes. I pay a huge amount of taxes. And I see Trump trying to cut a lot of things. Is there anything you guys see that we could cut so we could cut federal, state, and local taxes? Do you see any programs we can cut? Again, as a libertarian, I would like to see less government, less socialism, and just I'd like to keep more of my own money. Do you guys have any quick thoughts on that?
Any programs that you guys think we should be cutting?
Well, if I could take the flip side, we don't want to cut agricultural research, because the gains found from the discoveries from our public land-grant universities are spread out freely among everyone. It's not private intellectual property. We don't want to cut food safety. So those areas I think should be sacrosanct.
I think that, you know, someone once asked me, so what would you be happy with if Trump did? I said that he cut 10% out of discretionary spending, including the military, which they're growing now at 13% on both sides of the aisle. That we became more nimble, smarter about how we make investments, and that we force that by really having a meaningful conversation about reduction. But the bottom line is that right now we aren't paying for what we get. We're borrowing for what we get. And that's a real challenge. And I think for a small business person, my greatest concern is that we will spiral into a debt challenge that we can't spiral out of. You know, we came up to that with people basically dumping our bonds. That's why we pulled back on Liberation Day, right? I mean, we can all have an argument about that. I'm pretty sure that's what drove that decision. And so we have to get fiscal policy right, and we have to do it long term to provide the stability that's going to lead to your continuing opportunity. And I think when you look at overall distribution of taxes, you know, there's going to be a big fight about what that should look like. And so at this point in time, when you said, could you reduce my taxes, I would say, you know, not until we figure out what the trajectory is going to be on debt, but we've got to reduce expenditures. This has got to be two sides of the effort. And so it's not a satisfying answer, I'm sure, for you is looking for, you know, we can you know, reduce expenditures. The other thing I thought was really interesting is they were talking about basically doing a flat rate for automobiles. You know, a lot of cars are on the road, they aren't paying gas tax. How do you level the playing? There's different kinds of things that can happen within the structure of the tax code that aren't happening because there's too many sacred cows in the tax code. And so, you know, we'll wait and see what they produce, but if I think you could take 10% out of discretionary spending without hurting if you did it right. I honestly believe that. I've seen a lot of, I wouldn't say waste, fraud, and abuse, because I don't think that's what you call it. I think it's misguided federal spending on programs that we probably don't need and that the federal government shouldn't be involved in.
Thank you.
Because I'm like the least political out of the group probably, I think we probably just need to take out entitlements. I wish DOGE had spent all their political capital on reducing entitlements in some way, but that's where...
Yeah, that would be the least political thing to say.
And I think I can. I'm like, yeah, I know you guys can't say that basically, but
Well,
I mean, that's...
You mean restructure entitlements, or you want to take them out?
No, not take them. I'm saying, yeah, that's where the cuts need to come
Yeah.
from if we actually ever want to have a sustainable future.
It's definitely the elephant in the room. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Well,
I guess I can say that though.
yeah.
You can.
Please join me in thanking our panelists.
We'll see you in Fargo.
Yeah, great to meet you. Thank you.